Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I have been on a journey to really understanding more of our senses, but in particularly sound. And last month, I had the opportunity to visit one of the nation's only independent multisensory design research lab that happens to is the home of the quietest place on earth, and that is the anechoic chamber. And I was fortunate enough to book out a hour-long session with a friend of mine, and we were able to experience this stillness, this quiet space. And it was one of the coolest experiences that I think I've ever had the honor of experiencing. And being that I am very my preferred sense of learning and gathering information is through auditory. I think that's how I learn best. It was really cool to be in a different environment with sound. And while we were there, I got to meet an amazing executive at the lab whose grandfather just happened to be the visionary and the creator of the Orfield Labs that studies all the senses. But getting to meet Emma, our guest today, was truly a pleasure. And as soon as she talks, you'll kind of hear the peace that kind of comes from her voice. But in getting to know her, I thought it would be really cool to have her on the show to share about, one, how she got into sound, what she's learning in regards to sound, but also to the other senses that maybe we don't necessarily think about on a day-to-day kind of level. And so without further ado, Emma, welcome to the show.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, James, for having me and for your interest.
Yeah. So what got you into this field? I know your grandfather probably had some influence on that, but walk us through your journey and kind of your curiosity with the senses and maybe even with sound.
Sure. Yes, well, my grandfather absolutely has a lot to do with my interest. Him and we consider ourselves kindred spirits since I was very little. And we've managed to realize that in a lot of ways we share similar interests and we speak the same language, for lack of a better explanation. But I have a background in cognitive and perceptual psychology, so I did my studies out in New York after growing up, living in Minneapolis. I have a pretty extensive arts and photography background. I'm incredibly visual. I consider myself an artist as much as anything else. But in New York, I studied cognitive and perceptual psychology, and I paired it with my design degree after realizing through my grandfather that architecture and design in the US very seldom teaches about human perception. And furthermore, it really, design schools, architectural schools in the US don't embrace science in the same way that they do in Europe. And so we find ourselves in a very intuitive field as design consultants because of that. And so I came after years of study and then kind of a realization that a lot of my interests overlapped with what my grandfather's been doing for over 50 years. And so after realizing that, him and I joined forces.
That's amazing. What is it about, what have you learned around sound and maybe the how it affects our perception or our psychology that continues to maybe pique your interest, or that is maybe mind blowing to you, or that is like still something that you just smile and shake your head at?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that the sound and the language revolving around sound has given me a better understanding as to how it can be applied throughout all of our senses. So we're all quite familiar with two sides of the spectrum, which is noise and silence. And when we think of noise and when we think of silence, we think of it about it in single sensory terms. We think about it in terms of acoustics, in terms of sound. But what I've learned is that silence or quietness and noise manifests across all areas of human sensation. So in acoustics, which we consult in, it's sound. In lighting, it's glare. In the thermal environment, it's draft. In terms of your sense of smell, olfactory, it's that there's an odor that you don't like. In sense of taste, it's that there's a taste that you don't like. So noise is really defined as unwanted stimulus.
Mm.
And you really can't walk in to an acoustically quiet room that's visually chaotic and be in a quiet room. So the fact that in our work, we've realized that we can't just work in a single sensory area. Um, the reason for that is we're not living single sensory experiences.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. And so with the consulting that you do, I imagine whoever is hiring you has a vibe or a look or a feel that they're wanting to elicit from whoever is using the space, visiting the space, occupying the space, and then you go to work on putting the necessary elements together to create that.
In a way, yes. Our clients are incredibly broad. Our clients are largely in the architectural or product consulting fields. And what we find among our clients, because we're working in such a specific area, or I shouldn't say so specific. Human perception is incredibly broad, but people aren't working in all the modalities like we are. There are no other building performance laboratories that are working like we are. Um, and so our clients all share the curiosity in wondering how they can design a space that is perceptually comfortable for their user. And a lot of our clients have to come to the understanding that we aren't folks that believe in opinion-based research. We aren't folks that do as much qualitative research. We believe that people, to a certain extent, are predictive, and we measure people as the core issue in all of the buildings we design and all the products that we design. So we don't rely on intuition to guide us. We rely on science to guide us. And our clients typically that piques their curiosity because they've realized what I mentioned before, which is that very seldom is science considered a key issue in the US within the design realms.
Hmm. Is there, so what I loved about your lab was, first of all, getting to the lab. It's covered in vines and foliage, and it looks like it's part of nature. I thought that that was just visually grounding. And then you walk in and you have all these different rooms. You have the reverberation room where no matter where you are in the room, in the space, it sounds like you're standing 6 inches away from the person. That one was really cool. But then there's the anechoic chamber, which is the negative 20 decibels, which is like so quiet you can hear your eyelids blink, which I actually heard my eyelids blink, which is insane. Um, you when I talked to you the first time, you mentioned that you sat in the room. You've sat in the room, I don't know, hundreds of times, maybe if I didn't misunderstand you. Yeah. What what has that taught you? Uh, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the anechoic chamber is on average a negative 13 decibels, although
Mm.
our most recent Guinness record was negative 24.9. And for folks that don't understand the decibel system, 0 decibels is considered the threshold of perfect infant hearing, and below 0 is in the animal hearing range. Prior to our getting our initial Guinness record in the early 2000s, there had never been a negative decibel claim in measurement period. Um, so the chamber has two primary characteristics, especially in terms of the sessions that I facilitate in there, which you've referenced. One is the lack of sound. So by definition, an anechoic chamber is 100% absorbent of sound, where a reverberation chamber is 100% reflective. Physically, the space is about 3 semi-trucks worth of material. It's largely constructed of steel and fiberglass wedges. But when I run these sessions, visitors sit in the chamber for typically 1 hour in silence and in darkness, which is what you did, James.
Mhm.
And so it's not just an issue of eliminating sound, it's also an issue of eliminating light. And the light can be more controlled than the sound can, because the sound is whatever it is in the room, right? The anechoic chamber is not a vacuum. When you walk in and you speak, you hear yourself within the context of essentially no environment because it's 100% absorbent. So I have spent a significant amount of time in the chamber. And what I've learned is how sensitive I am. I consider myself hypersensitive, which is probably about 50% of us are among that population. And those are a lot of the people that we work with and advocate for in our design work. But we find in a lot of different areas of therapeutics, especially in terms of our senses, when we're overwhelmed in one area of human sensation, when we go into a space where we're exposed to a characteristic of that's on the opposite side of the spectrum, that's low in stimulus, low in light, low in sound, low in glare, low in draft, we begin to feel better. And we begin to feel a sense of restoration. We begin to feel restored. And so this space, the anechoic chamber, is such an extreme metaphor and example of that many people that go in there, including myself, feel much more peaceful upon leaving, feel much less anxious upon leaving, feel a sense of lightness physically. And that's certainly my experience too. On a more personal note, I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and I grew up in a very noisy environment, and it was overwhelming to me. And so early on, I developed a meditation practice, and I've had that for a long time. Although I still find that as the oldest, somewhat extroverted sibling of 5, that I'm very concerned about what's going on around me, even if I'm meditating. So when I walk into the anechoic chamber and I sit and have a moment and try to meditate, I find that everything in me that wants to look for a distraction is let down. And everything in me that typically can't focus can. And considering that's something I've struggled with in so many different areas throughout my life, I can't think of many experiences I've had that have been more restorative. And so I've developed it as a serious practice.
Yeah, I definitely felt completely restored as well. And my visions were very vivid and loud. It was almost as if I heard my visions. And So there was that. It was like in my meditation, having those like really colorful, almost like real life conversations that I felt like I was having out loud, but in my head, and then an extreme enhancement of body awareness, stiffness, tightness, loose, where I'm holding tension, uh, maybe even feeling a little intuitive nudge to move certain parts of my body as I was sitting there for, what felt like 10-ish, 15 minutes. What have been some things that other people have shared in regards to those aspects that you could add additional insight on?
Yeah, so well, I should mention that since March, I've been facilitating group sessions in the chamber that happen 4 times a week, 4 to 6 times a week, largely on Mondays and Fridays, where I open a session online that's a group session and people can buy individual tickets. And so oftentimes 5 strangers will show up and they show up understanding that they're going to be sitting in silence and darkness for an hour. And considering for the past, since we initially got our Guinness record, everything that we have observed from people has been informal. All of the responses, a lot of what I share about the chamber has historically been anecdotal. And so I've used these new sessions, especially given the uniqueness of the setup, as an opportunity to do some serious research. And so when people come into the chamber, I have them fill out something called the semantic differential, which asks them about how they're feeling in terms of peace on a 1 to 7 scale, whether they're feeling like they enjoy darkness or not on a 1 to 7 scale, whether they feel like they enjoy emotions or not. And so I've come up with a series of semantics that relate to what I'm trying to understand at this moment with the chamber, which has a lot to do with trying to figure out if it has real therapeutic potential. Um, and I've noticed that among all the people that have come in both of the sheets that they fill out before and afterwards, they are improving significantly in all of the positive characteristics. So people are reporting feeling much less anxious. I would even go to say 40 or 50% or less anxious. People are reporting that they feel more emotional, that they enjoy their emotions more, that they're enjoying darkness, that they enjoy quiet. So a lot of people come in as a one-off. They've never been here before. They don't necessarily live here. And it's important to realize that the anechoic chamber doesn't represent the real world. And so when you walk into a room within a room within a room that's dark and as quiet as you are, something happens. So there's both the experience of being here and of being in the chamber and of being outside of your typical metaphors. And then there's whatever is going on in your head. And so we often talk about how, my grandfather and I often talk about how when you're going to work or when you're going on a walk out in the woods, the thing to look at isn't really about how the woods is making you feel and how it's changing what your experience is. It's more about how you feel going into the woods or how you feel going into the office. And that's not spoken enough about how much our expectations, our feelings are leading up to something changes the experience. And so I think understanding that you're going to a quiet place is also significant in the research.
Hmm, that's a good point. The intention, the expectation.
Yeah.
Um, if someone can't necessarily make a trip to experience something like this, are there elements that you suggest in any sense um, that they can get us a dose of, whether it is visiting nature or let's bring it to their home, right? home environmental things have you noticed have a good impact on minimizing anxiety? Because that seems to be more on the rise, or just adding a sense of groundedness that regardless of personality or age or maybe culture, but if we're sticking with the West, like the United States, what have you found to be effective from your research?
I think the um, simplest statement would be what we've been telling ourselves and have been being told for a long time, which is essentially less is more. I'm amazed at how when I get myself to go on a walk around the lake in the morning, how good it makes me feel every time. I'm surprised when I finish a meditation, how wonderful I feel for no particular reason. Um, I think that I think developing a practice for yourself, in terms of meditation, in terms of being out in nature, are certainly wonderful. I have a client who has come in for very long sessions, about 4 hours. And when he went back to New York after his visit here, he bought wonderful, very high-end a headset to keep the sound out and essentially a blackout face mask for his eyes. And he will practice being in darkness and in as much silence as the headset can offer him, as a consistent practice. And based on what he shared with me, that's been incredibly positive for him. And it's been a way for him to try to reap the same benefits despite not being here.
Yeah, I love that. I was at church the other day, maybe about 45 days ago, and not crazy religious, but I like just being sometimes in those types of environments where everyone's, devoted to just feeling more connected and maybe activating more faith and things. And so I was listening to this woman sing, and the more I listened, the more I noticed my body just become super calm. And like there's this, maybe you might know what I'm talking about as like a if it's an actual thing, but whenever my body becomes super relaxed, it's like my mouth um kind of just not gets cotton mouth, but it's like it just like almost stops producing saliva in a way. It slows down and I just like feel super relaxed. But I know that I'm relaxed by how my mouth feels. It's very interesting. And so as she was singing, I noticed that that was happening. And I have that feeling when I'm doing sound baths or when I'm in the anechoic chamber or that. But it was a loud environment, but it was a certain, like, let's call it frequency of sound. And so this idea or this question popped in my head is, can we use our voices, like our tones, to influence how people feel, how they think? My answer is yes, but I want to hear your answer is like, at what level, how much do you know about that, or what comes up when I share that?
So my thinking is we often think that our minds are teaching our bodies, but I think it's more so the opposite. I think it's more our bodies that are teaching our minds. And like going to church, like you're talking about, I have a Catholic background. I don't practice in Catholicism in the present. Um, but I have always found places of worship, Catholic places of worship, happen to be where I've spent the most time, to be incredibly spiritual to me. and we've done a lot of work in religious architecture as well, where we've discovered what attributes, what characteristics of a church make people feel that way. I mean, maybe it's the Gregorian chant, maybe it's the incense, maybe it's the priest, maybe it's the people. Um, but there's a wonderful thing in religious architecture that is the religion doesn't have to be your doctrine. The space can be regardless. And I think churches are really incredible at that. Um, I've found that, I mean, so, of course, I think sound can have an incredible impact on how people feel. I think what you're talking about in terms of your face feeling more open makes me think your jaw is relaxed, and your jaw, we carry all this tension up in our jaws. Um, but to talk more spiritually about it, I think there's a lot of experience. Some of the most charming experiences that we have are experiences where we walk into a building and we don't know why it is that we feel the way that we do. We don't know why it is that we've become relaxed or delighted, or we don't know why it feels spiritual to us, but it does. And I think sound has the capacity, without going into technical terms. I know that sound has, a wonderful capacity, and historically has had a wonderful capacity to heal people. And so we work at both sides of the spectrum. We work absolutely in the sound realm, and then the lack thereof realm.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I've been to that church so many times and have heard singing like that, but for whatever reason on that day with that person, it was maybe it was timing, maybe it was how I felt going into it, maybe it was all those factors. But yeah, it really got me thinking like how we feel before we speak, I think creates the tonality or the frequency in which the words can now be expressed. And I think that also, to kind of go back to your expectation of the experience, kind of creating the experience, the intention or the emotional home in which the words come from do somehow, some way, whether it's measurable or not, impact the senses. Um, at least that's how I see it, or that's how what I believe. And um,
Yeah.
it's it's just fascinating that when you can really be mindful of all those senses, all your senses, they become like knobs that you can dial up with the sensitivity, or potentially dial down the more relationship you build with them, it seems.
Yeah, I think church is just like the woods, or just like the anechoic chamber. It's not about the church, it's about you.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool. What do your clients come like? What's a common question you get from people who hire you and the lab that
Well,
you yeah
sorry, go on.
that like are that you like, that excites you?
So a lot of our clients will come to us with problems. However, many of their problems have not been defined. So, for example, clients will come to us with an issue that they have with their product, or with their space, or with uh, organizationally how they're running their company. And they often have an idea in their mind of what they'd like to do, whether it's to quiet a product, or to create a wellness program, or to, there's so many examples. But the issue is many people in the product realm haven't figured out what it is their customers want, because all of the market research they've done has been opinion based. On the other side, a lot of people come to us knowing that they want to create something like a wellness program. Although when we've asked them what their definition of wellness is, they don't have one. So our our responsibility and what we can give to our clients is a definition. A huge part of our practice is research. And in a similar way to what I was explaining with my sessions in the anechoic chamber, our first stop along any journey with a client is to define the issue and to define what the user need is. And so our clients are usually surprised by that. And they're often surprised by what they discover in the process, because just like everything else we do in our life, we often don't know why we're doing it.
Right, right. Yeah, I remember you showing us the one of the latest projects that you were working on with the sound of clicks on pens,
Oh,
and to
yeah.
figure out
Yeah.
what click of a pen symbolizes, I think you said quality of the pen. Is that right?
Yeah. A pen company came to us wanting to try to understand how their customers, how their users felt about the different pens that they offer. And so what you saw when you were at the lab was our trying to understand if it was something that we could measure. So we chose 5 different writing utensils, and we were measuring the sound and the vibration of them to try to gauge if between the 5 of them we saw any clear differences. And so a lot of our facility, as you witnessed, is about demonstrating to people what we do. So because we're in such a specific area, we feel that it's not our we don't think we can make people or even put on to people that they should understand something before they've experienced it themselves. And that's why we operate as an experiential lab. Most of our clients or potential clients or people that are just interested in our business in general come in and are intensely immersed in each area of human sensation that we work in and how it's applied. And we find that you can be much more successful demonstrating in the real world than being conceptual from the beginning to the end.
Are there any like percentages of how frequently used all the senses are? Is there like a way to measure that? Like, do we rely the most on vision, or do we rely the most on hearing, and consciously or unconsciously? Has there been any data put to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as humans, we're incredibly visual, um, even compared to most animals. Uh, we we are very, very high up on the visual chain. Um, and so especially because of our ability to be so precise in what we see, so we can see things very clearly. There are many animals that, that can see different things, but our our ability to be specific is much higher than most animals, unless you're talking about some of these incredible birds of prey and so on. So I think of us as being very acquainted visually with the world and being very acquainted in terms of sound. Our other senses, of course, we're very acquainted with as well in terms of our experiences, but I don't think that our language is as developed as the other two. I often think of, okay, if you're paying attention to the 5 or 6 senses and you walk into the anechoic chamber and you eliminate all light and you eliminate most all sound, the others are going to come to the forefront. A lot of people that walk in there feel very physically rooted in their bodies more so than when they're out in the real world. I'm sure if you were to eat something fantastic in there, it would be uh, a delight.
Right. 10x
But I think
sense.
we're largely rooted in our visual, physical,
Hmm.
um, our hearing.
Have you noticed any improvement in your ability to read others as far as like how they talk with what tone they're talking in, how fast or slow they talk, and maybe even how they're holding their body, having studied this so much and kind of being more in tune with your own body, has that grown your social awareness and interactions?
Yeah, I think it has. I've been incredibly social for as long as I can remember. So I love people. I love interacting with people. Um, I love trying to guess what people are going to think. So because my interest is so high and is so intuitive in that area, or because being social is an intuitive and energizing thing for me, I consider myself to be, fairly good at reading people, as you say. Um, but of course, there's many things that I don't notice. Um, I also have a large interest in micro expressions and what we can know about what someone's thinking or not thinking just based on how they appear. Um, and that's not a field that we do a lot of work in, but it's a big interest of ours.
Hmm. What do you think when you look out at the world at this moment and you see everything that's going on? What do you think, from your lens, the world needs more of? Or if they were to have more of this thing that you would are suggesting, there'd be a maybe more of a recalibration or more of a centeredness that most people can find.
Hmm. I think we need a whole lot more grace. I position myself in a place where I'm not just surrounded by people that I completely resonate with, whether in a political sense or otherwise. Um, I grew up learning and appreciating the conversations that I've had with people that I don't necessarily agree with. And I'm concerned at how little people are, how people really aren't comfortable with doing that. Um, I think that in many, many, many ways, we are all speaking the same language, but the nature of the human experience and the nature of uh, how different we all are leads to, of course, major issues of separation. And so my prayer is that we're all able to be more patient and be more understanding and have more grace. Um, Although that seems like a big ask.
Yeah. I think all those things that you mentioned are beautiful. And I think the start point is always towards self first. If I can have more patience with myself, I think I can have more patience for other people,
Right.
right? Grace for me, grace for others, understanding of me, understanding of others. And the reason why I love the research that you do so much is particularly the sound and maybe even the vision, which is why I probably feel so called to go like on the darkness retreats where you like go into these underground bunkers basically 4 to 7 days, is when we rely too heavily on environmental factors for how we feel or who we are or what we do, the nature of that can change so radically and fast that maybe we never really have a true bearing on who we are. But until we sit, let's say metaphorically, in that silence or in that discomfort or tune in by closing our eyes, that we then can face and wrestle with the hard questions or the hard truths or the things that we've been too busy to see, hear, or do, purposely or unconsciously, that I think we find the clarity that helps us feel more grounded, especially in those turbulent, uncertain times. Do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So if I were to make a recommendation list for those listening on what things that they can do that can, let's say, quiet the noise so that their truth or their deeper intuitive wisdom, knowledge, whatever can come through, tell me what you think about this list. One would be some sort of like your client, a blindfold of sorts. It doesn't have to be an expensive one. It could literally be a bandana that you put over your eyes and some sort of noise cancellation headphones. And put a timer on your phone for 10 to 15 minutes and just observe. Sit there without maybe you have an intention, maybe you don't, but the point would be what just observe what comes up, what happens, what thoughts do you have, what emotions arise, how does your body feel, these types of things. And maybe from there a thread will appear that then you can pull and lead to greater levels of awareness or new strategies that you might like or a conversation you need to have with someone that you've been avoiding, whatever. So that would be one thing. A second thing could be getting in nature for at least 15 minutes a day, whether that's a mindfulness walk or just getting some sort of sunlight, preferably in the earlier parts of the day for circadian rhythm purposes. But even if it's later, still better than nothing. Um, and three, maybe you can help me add one, but it's something along the lines of like not having as vibrant of a environment to sit in. And maybe that's going back to our first one with the eyes closed and the noise cancellation, but
Mm.
some sort of muting of the environmental stimulus so that your body doesn't have to work as hard.
Yeah, I think if you have control over the environment that you're in, you'll notice that when your space is more gently lit, when there's less noise, right? When
Mm-hmm.
there's less perceptual noise, you'll feel more relaxed. Um, Especially if you're part of the 50% of us that are cognitively or perceptually disabled. Um, I think doing anything, even if people aren't too too familiar with the language of considering what feels spiritual to them, I think it's I think it's something that most people could discover. And so I think to consider what feels delightful, like what makes you elated before, during, or after, and developing practices that fit with that. For my client, yes, the blindfold and the sensory deprivation is really positive. Um, Although it's could be different for everybody. Um, for me, it's that I take 1 or 2 baths a day. I have a breathwork practice. I meditate. I go to the float tanks. So for me, I'm very interested in some of these therapeutic modalities. But yeah, going on a walk wherever you can and just being outside, away from the screens and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think we all need more of.
Yeah. Have you found anyone that is operates on the opposite side of the stillness spectrum or the vivid imagery side where they like it dialed up, like loud music, very bright, and that is like calming for them?
Yeah, the autism spectrum, we do a lot of
Mm.
work with folks on the autism spectrum. And there's a small population of these people that are sensory seeking.
Hmm.
And you can't design for them as a whole
Sure.
because they need to be stimulated in particular ways. Um, but there is a population of people there. And I also my life is not just filled with people that are doing the same things that I'm doing. My life is not just the meditators and the priests or whomever. I have lots of very dear people in my life that live a much noisier life than I do. Um, and so I think preference plays a role, but I think that a lot of us also learn to mask as we walk through life. And so we learn, even if we're not social, we learn to be, and we're masked. Even if we don't like to be in a noisy environment, we learn to be there and to mask it. So it's a complicated issue because there's what you think you like, and then there's what you like. And there's what you think you prefer, and then there's what you prefer.
Right. And
Um,
it's hard to delineate that until you experience it.
right. And
Much
until you
like,
actually measure.
yeah, much like our my friend that was with there that you kind of mentioned that she was more on that sensitive side to noise. She didn't know that she kind of had an idea, but until she experienced the quiet, that she's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, yes, that is definitely me, you know? And so I
Yeah.
think that's another really helpful way, or I guess a reinforcement of like having an open mind and how powerful that can be. Because if you don't experience new things, and it's hard to draw the contrast and to know preference over just a societal norm, let's say.
Right. Yeah, a lot of us just don't know. And like your friend who walked into the anechoic chamber, and I took one look at her and said, "You have misophonia."
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, that's a funny population because we have people that come in every now and then. They walk into such a quiet space, and you immediately notice, based on their facial expression, that they've just very quickly experienced a sigh of relief. So,
Fascinating.
yeah.
Is there anything else that you think would be helpful for the listener to know about any of our senses that can help them better regulate, stay centered, aligned, focus, calm, any of those things?
I think as a whole, what we're not taught is that if there's some issue around us, whether it's a light that's too bright or a person that you're having trouble with, um, anything, we're taught to go and look at the source of the problem. We're taught to go investigate the light. We're taught to go and investigate this person. And the reality is you learn very little from doing that. Um, the light isn't going to tell you how you feel. You are. The person isn't going to tell you how you feel. You are. And so in all of these different areas that we look at, both in terms of how an environment's making us feel, just how we feel engaging with the world in general, I think the biggest recommendation that I can give is to look back to yourself and to define the problem based on how you feel as a receiver rather than the characteristics of the source.
So put another way in this, let's say the light example, would it be then if I'm noticing I'm getting agitated and that this light is so bright, would my next plan of action be like, why does this light bother me so much?
Right. Well, in a more technical way, there's a physics metaphor called the source path receiver metaphor. And if if the light is the source and the path is from the light to me and I'm the receiver, in my field, if something's wrong with that light, everyone's going to run towards the light. we're going to run towards the receiver. So what I mean to say is just you have to be user focused, you have to be occupant focused in a more personal sense. There's so much more that you can learn from reflecting on how you respond than what another entity, person, object is doing.
Right. So if I sit there and ask myself that question, then I might uncover that that light symbolizes me being in a spotlight, and then that symbolizes me being in pressure to have to do, say, or be something that maybe I'm not ready for, don't want to be, or feel forced to be, and that may be what is creating the resistance.
Sure, I think you could. I think you could definitely apply it metaphorically.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. So be more curious around how you feel in environments and why that may be.
Yeah, just ask yourself.
Don't ask the environment to change, but ask what may need to change in me to better either fit in the environment or realize that this isn't the environment for me.
Or more so, just look to yourself to understand within the context of in the environment and architecture. You always look to the user to understand what is and what isn't working. And not in asking the user, but in measuring them.
Got it. Well, Emma, thank you for shining some light on this. And I am still always so fascinated with our senses and how we perceive reality and how reality may shift depending on so many different factors. Um, as we wind down here, what's something that has really been exciting for you to pursue or has you really curious at the moment?
Well, as we continue to shift um, into our work in discovering potential therapeutics with the anechoic chamber, I've reflected a lot on what it means to be in the real world and what it means to not be in the real world. My grandfather and I have lots of conversations about how when you're on the devices, oftentimes you're not in the real world. And we see people later in life, in the dementia work that we do and in the aging work that we do, we see them withdrawing because their bodies have withdrawn, right? They can't see as well, they can't hear as well, they can't move as well. And withdrawals is largely what brings in cognitive decline late in life because you're not engaging. We've been reflecting on how there may be a tremendous parallel between that and the devices and of technology. And so I'm very interested in how I can encourage people to spend more time being in the real world and in uncovering what we assume are major issues with a lot of the devices that we're using on a daily basis. So, while I spend a lot of time with people that are experiencing the anechoic chamber, I understand that a lot of these people are just like me and that they're spending some time with themselves in the real world and a lot of time not. And so I encourage everybody to take that into account in general.
Amazing. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that correlation you find there with therapeutics. That sounds super exciting and also very needed. So thank you for continuing to do your work at a high level. Thank you for the experience I got to have last month. You were a great host, and
Thanks.
I
Pleasure.
love bringing more of this information to more ears. So appreciate you being on the show. Any last words?
I don't think so. Just I'm grateful. I feel a lot of gratitude, and it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. All right, everybody, go out there, be more in touch, be more intentional, and be your own 1%.